We were pulling into my son's driveway when I suddenly knew it was a trap. I gripped my husband's arm and told him to stop the car right now. He trusted me, and that choice saved everything. My name is Vivian Whitaker. I am 68 years old, and this is the story of how a quiet 40th anniversary dinner became a fight for my freedom, my marriage, and the life we had spent 4 decades building. The evening air was unseasonably warm for October, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and expensive landscaping as my husband navigated our sedan through the winding, manicured streets of Stonecrest. Marcus and I were supposed to be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary. Our son Marc had insisted on hosting a private family dinner at his sprawling 5-bedroom home. It was supposed to be an intimate evening, just Marc, his wife Chloe, our grandson Jamal, and the two of us. I should have known better. At 68, after a 30-year career as a senior underwriter for a major commercial real estate firm, my entire professional life had been dedicated to risk assessment. I was paid exceptionally well to spot the hidden liabilities that other people glossed over, the numbers that did not add up, the structural flaws in a seemingly perfect contract. That instinct does not simply retire when you do. It becomes a part of how you see the world. Marcus, my husband of 4 decades, was a retired structural engineer. He was a man of quiet strength, logic, and precision. He understood load-bearing walls and foundational integrity. We were a team built on assessing reality, not fantasy. So when Marcus turned the steering wheel to guide our car onto Marc's long, winding driveway, the alarm bells in my mind did not just ring, they screamed. "Stop the car," I said. My voice was low, sharp, and carried no room for debate. Marcus did not question me. He did not ask why or tell me I was being paranoid. After 40 years together, he knew that when I used that specific tone, something was critically wrong. He pressed the brake pedal immediately, bringing our heavy car to a silent halt just behind the thick row of mature maple trees that lined the edge of our son's property. "Kill the engine," I whispered, "and cut the headlights." The car went completely dark, swallowed by the deep shadows of the affluent suburban street. Marcus shifted the car into park and turned to look at me, his hands resting easily on the steering wheel. "What do you see, Vivian?" he asked quietly. I pointed through the windshield past the decorative wrought iron gates toward the side of Marc's massive house. Marc and Chloe loved to project wealth. They were obsessed with country club memberships, luxury brands, and projecting a flawless image of upper-middle-class success. But it was not their perfectly manicured lawn that caught my attention. It was the 3 vehicles parked deliberately out of sight, tucked behind the tall hedges near the service entrance. "Look at the cars, Marcus," I said, my eyes scanning the license plates and vehicle models. The first was a plain white transit van. It had no obvious company logos, but it had a heavy-duty wheelchair lift attached to the back bumper and dark-tinted windows. It was a private medical transport vehicle, the kind used to move non-compliant patients to lockdown facilities. The second vehicle was a sleek black Mercedes sedan. I recognized the custom vanity plates instantly. It belonged to Richard Sterling, the most notoriously ruthless estate and probate lawyer in the county, a man known for helping greedy children quietly strip assets from their elderly parents through legally questionable conservatorships. The third vehicle made my blood run absolutely cold. It was a silver SUV with a specific medical parking permit hanging from the rearview mirror. It belonged to Dr. Evans, my primary care physician. Why would a medical transport van, a predatory estate lawyer, and my doctor be hiding in the driveway for a quiet family anniversary dinner? Marcus followed my gaze. I watched his jaw tighten as his engineering mind calculated the variables and arrived at the exact same horrifying conclusion I had. His hand reached over in the dark and gripped mine. Before either of us could speak, my cell phone vibrated violently in my purse. I pulled it out. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the car. It was a text message from Jamal, our 19-year-old grandson. Jamal was a sophomore studying cybersecurity at Howard University. He had come home for a short fall break and was staying with his parents for the week. He was brilliant, quiet, and fiercely loyal to us. That night, he was inside the house, supposedly setting the table for our anniversary dinner. I opened the message. The words on the screen made the breath leave my lungs. "Grandma, do not come to the door." Dad locked all the deadbolts from the inside and took my keys. Dr. Evans is sitting in the dining room with a stack of medical transfer papers. The lawyer is with him. I heard them talking. It is a trap to force you into a memory care lockdown unit tonight. They have an ambulance crew waiting in the kitchen. Get out of here." I stared at the glowing screen. For a fraction of a second, the mother in me wanted to deny it. The mother in me wanted to believe that the boy I had carried, birthed, and raised would never do something so monstrous. But the underwriter in me, the woman who had spent decades reading the fine print of human greed, knew it was the absolute truth. It all snapped into perfect, terrifying focus. The strange bouts of fatigue I had been experiencing over the past few months, the slight tremors in my hands, the moments of brain fog. Chloe, my daughter-in-law, had been bringing me expensive imported joint supplements every week, insisting I take them daily for my health, and standing in my kitchen until I swallowed them. I could not yet prove what was inside those capsules, but the pattern was suddenly impossible to ignore. The symptoms began only after Chloe introduced the bottles, and Dr. Evans had documented every episode as if he had been waiting for them. They had been manufacturing a medical record designed to make ordinary people believe I was losing my mind. Their plan was to persuade a friendly judge to issue a temporary emergency guardianship order, remove Marcus as my decision-maker by claiming he was confused and unable to protect me, and place us in a locked evaluation unit long enough for Marc to take control of our accounts. The order alone would not safely transfer every asset, so Richard Sterling had prepared additional powers of attorney deed ratifications and voluntary admission forms for us to sign under pressure. Once those signatures existed, Marc could present the entire theft as a lawful family intervention. They did not want to celebrate our 40 years of marriage. They wanted to erase us. I handed the phone to Marcus. He read the message. In the dim light of the street lamp filtering through the trees, I saw the exact moment a father's heart broke and a husband's protective rage took over. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned gray. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, his voice completely devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man preparing for war. My phone lit up again. This time it was a phone call. The caller ID displayed Marc's name. My son was calling me. I took a deep, silent breath. I closed my eyes for one brief moment, burying the mother who loved her son and bringing forth the executive who destroyed corporate predators for a living. I swiped the screen and answered the call. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. My voice was perfectly pitched, warm, melodic, slightly apologetic, the voice of a sweet, unsuspecting elderly mother. "Mom, where are you guys?" Marc asked. His voice was dripping with a syrupy, fake concern that made my stomach physically turn. "Chloe has the roast in the oven and everything is ready. We are all just waiting for you to walk through the door." I looked through the windshield at his house. I could see the soft glow of the dining room lights. I could picture the lawyer and the doctor sitting at the table waiting to strip me of my human rights. "Oh, Marc, I am so incredibly sorry," I said, layering just the right amount of distress into my tone. "We are not going to make it to dinner tonight, honey." There was a sharp pause on the other end of the line. The syrupy warmth in my son's voice vanished, replaced by a tight, poorly concealed panic. "What do you mean you are not going to make it? You have to make it. Dinner is already served. Where are you?" "We had a terrible blowout on the highway," I lied effortlessly. "The front passenger tire is completely shredded. Marcus is trying to deal with the roadside assistance company now, but they said it will be at least 2 hours before a tow truck can reach us safely. It is dark, and we are just sitting on the shoulder of the interstate. Mom, that is ridiculous." Marc snapped, his frustration bleeding through his carefully constructed facade. "Tell me exactly what mile marker you are at. I will drive out there and pick you up right now. Leave the car. You have to come to the house." He was desperate. The medical transport crew was charging by the hour. The corrupt doctor and lawyer were expecting their payday. He needed his victim in the trap tonight. "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "We are not abandoning our vehicle on the side of the highway in the dark. We will just have to reschedule our anniversary dinner. Eat the roast without us, sweetheart. Give Chloe and Jamal my love. We will call you tomorrow when we are safe at home." Before he could argue, before he could try to manipulate me further, I ended the call. I turned the phone completely off and dropped it into my purse. "Keep your eyes on the front door," I told Marcus. We sat in the suffocating silence of the dark car, watching the house. Less than 30 seconds later, the heavy oak front door of Marc's house swung open with violent force. My son stepped out onto the porch. He was wearing a tailored suit, looking every inch the successful executive, but his face was contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. The sweet, loving son he had played on the phone was gone. In his place was a desperate, angry predator who had just lost his prey. He paced across the front porch, pulling his phone from his pocket and dialing furiously. When his call did not connect, he let out a shout of anger that carried across the manicured lawn. He kicked a large, expensive ceramic planter near the steps, shattering it into pieces across the concrete walkway. He stood there, breathing heavily, staring out into the dark street, completely unaware that his parents were sitting less than 50 yards away, watching the monster he had become. "Back the car up, Marcus," I said quietly. "Do not turn the lights on until we are 3 streets over." Marcus shifted the car into reverse. With the engine barely making a sound, we glided backward through the shadows, slipping away from the trap that had been set for us. As the house disappeared from my view, I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a luxury for victims, and I refused to be a victim. My son wanted a war over my assets. He wanted to strip me of my dignity and lock me away in the dark. He thought I was just a tired old woman who would sign anything put in front of her. He had severely underestimated the woman who raised him. We drove into the night, leaving our old life behind. My son had drawn the battle lines, but I was going to dictate exactly how this war would end, and I was going to take everything from him. The neon sign outside the Starlight Motor Inn buzzed with a rhythmic hum. 3 of the letters were burnt out. I walked up to the bulletproof glass at the front desk and slid 3 crisp $100 bills through the rusted metal slot. The clerk did not ask for my name. He did not ask for my identification. He simply handed me a heavy brass key attached to a faded plastic tag. Room 12. We parked the car around the back of the building, keeping it hidden from the main road. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial bleach. The floral bedspreads were thin and worn down at the edges. I walked inside and locked the deadbolt, throwing the chain across the doorframe. Marcus did not sit down. He took off his coat, draped it over the back of a scratched wooden chair, and began to pace. The floorboards creaked under his heavy steps. For a man who had spent 40 years ensuring the structural integrity of skyscrapers and bridges, the collapse of his own family was a failure he was trying to calculate. He walked from the window to the bathroom door, measuring the space with his strides. His hands were clasped tightly behind his back. The jawline that I had loved for 4 decades was set in stone. He was processing the variables. He was running the equations. He was trying to figure out how the foundation of our son had rotted away without us noticing the cracks. I did not pace. I sat on the edge of the mattress and opened my purse. I pulled out my cell phone, powered it down completely, and removed the SIM card. I placed the small piece of plastic on the bedside table and crushed it beneath the heel of my shoe. I was not going to give Marc the satisfaction of tracking my location. If there were tears waiting to fall, I swallowed them. Crying is a biological response to pain, but I had no time for biology. I needed strategy. My sorrow hardened into a cold block of ice in my chest. Every ounce of maternal warmth I had left for my son evaporated in the sterile air of that cheap motel room. I mentally cataloged our assets. The house was fully paid off. We had substantial funds in our joint checking accounts, a robust portfolio of municipal bonds, and our retirement savings. But Marc had my signature on file from old tax documents. I had my Social Security number. If he had the audacity to hire a corrupt lawyer and a fake doctor, he certainly had the means to forge my name. I watched Marcus turn on his heel and walk back toward the window. He parted the cheap curtains just a fraction of an inch, scanning the empty parking lot. "We are completely off the grid," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the gravel in his throat. "He thinks we are wandering around in a state of delirium. He will use that against us." "I know," I replied. I smoothed the wrinkles from my skirt. "He is going to move fast. People who set traps do not like it when their prey escapes. He will scramble. He will make mistakes. We just have to be in position to catch them." The highway outside groaned under the weight of passing semi-trucks. The sound vibrated through the thin walls of our room. I took a small notepad and a pen from my purse. I started writing down the names of every financial institution we used, every password I could remember, every potential vulnerability in our estate plan. I was building a firewall in my mind. Marcus finally stopped pacing. He sat down next to me on the bed. The mattress sagged under our combined weight. He looked at the crushed SIM card on the table, then looked at my notepad. "He is our son, Vivian," he whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "He was our son," I corrected him. My voice did not shake. "The man who tried to lock us in a psychiatric ward to steal our home is a stranger. We treat him like a hostile entity. We treat him like a threat." Marcus nodded slowly. The engineer in him accepted the new reality. The father in him died a little more. We sat in silence, waiting for the clock to strike midnight. We had a meeting, we had an inside man, and we had a tremendous amount of very difficult work to do. The room at the Starlight Motor Inn gave us privacy, but it did not give us peace. Once the door was secured, Marcus stood at the window and watched the parking lot while I spread the contents of my purse across the small table. Receipts, prescription cards, a notebook, 2 pens, the anniversary card I had bought for him, and the amber supplement bottle formed a strange inventory of the life we had left behind. The card was still sealed. On the front, 2 silver rings were printed beneath the words, "40 years, still choosing you." I had planned to give it to Marcus after dessert. Instead, we were hiding from our only son. For nearly an hour, we spoke in fragments. Marcus asked when I had first suspected something was wrong. I told him about Chloe's questions, the way she had begun inspecting our pantry and medicine cabinet, whenever she visited, the way Marc had casually suggested adding him to our bank accounts in case of an emergency. At the time, each incident had seemed small enough to excuse. Together, they formed a pattern I should have recognized. Marcus blamed himself for not seeing it. He remembered Marc asking him to sign a stack of supposed insurance forms several months earlier, and wondered whether one of those pages had been used to copy his signature. I reminded him that trust was not stupidity. Marc had studied us for 40 years. He knew which questions sounded harmless, which favors Marcus would perform without suspicion, and which expressions made me lower my guard. The betrayal worked because it had been designed by someone who understood our love. We traced the change in our son as honestly as we could. Marc had not been born cruel. As a child, he had rescued injured birds and cried when neighborhood children were bullied. But he hated limits. When he was 16, he took Marcus's car without permission and blamed a friend after denting the bumper. In college, he opened a credit card in our name to pay for a spring break trip, then called it a misunderstanding. Each time we had protected him from the full weight of consequence. We paid the balance, repaired the car, spoke to the school, and told ourselves maturity would arrive later. Success made the flaw worse. Marc entered logistics, learned how to speak with confidence, and discovered that polished appearances could persuade people to overlook weak foundations. Chloe admired that performance and amplified it. Their first house was larger than they could afford. Their second car arrived before the first was paid off. Every promotion led not to security, but to a more expensive illusion. When Marcus questioned the spending, Marc accused him of being old-fashioned. When I advised caution, Chloe joked that underwriters saw disaster everywhere. I finally understood that our help had become part of the machinery. Every rescue taught Marc that someone else would absorb the damage. He did not see our estate as the result of decades of discipline. He saw it as the final reserve fund that existed to protect him from reality. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and covered his face. He said he could survive losing the house, the investments, and every possession we owned, but he did not know how to survive knowing our son had planned to drug me. I sat beside him and took his hands. His palms were rough from a lifetime of drawing, measuring, building, and repairing. I told him that grief would come later. We would give it the time it deserved, but not while Marc was still moving against us. We established rules. We would not contact friends or relatives who might accidentally reveal our location. We would not return home until we knew whether the property was being watched. We would assume every familiar professional connected to Dr. Evans or Richard Sterling was compromised until proven otherwise. We would document everything we remembered, even details that seemed insignificant. Most importantly, neither of us would make a decision alone. Marc's plan depended on isolating us and presenting one as incapable of protecting the other. We would answer by remaining exactly what we had always been, a team. I opened the anniversary card and wrote a new message beneath the printed greeting. "Tonight you trusted me before you understood why. That is what 40 years means." Marcus read it twice. Then he folded the card carefully and placed it inside his coat over his heart. At exactly 1:00 in the morning, a soft rhythm of knocks sounded against the heavy wooden door. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. It was the sequence we had agreed upon. Marcus stepped forward, unlatched the chain, and pulled the door open. Jamal slipped into the room like a shadow. He was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt and carrying a heavy black backpack slung over one shoulder. The cool night air rushed in with him before Marcus firmly secured the deadbolt again. My grandson did not waste time with emotional embraces. He did not offer useless apologies for his father's behavior. He dropped his backpack onto the cheap laminate table in the center of the room and immediately pulled out a sleek silver laptop. From the front pocket of his bag, he retrieved 3 sealed boxes containing prepaid burner phones. He slid 2 of them across the table toward me. "Cash purchases from a gas station on the other side of town," Jamal said, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. "The geolocation data will not link back to this motel. Turn them on, connect to the secure mobile hotspot I am about to establish, and do not use your real names for any account setups." I took the boxes and handed one to Marcus. We were operating with military precision. I watched my grandson boot up his computer. His fingers flew across the keyboard with a terrifying speed. The soft blue light of the screen reflected in his eyes. He looked so much like his father had at that age, but his spirit was entirely different. Marc had always been hungry for shortcuts, looking for the easiest path to luxury. Jamal was a builder. He understood architecture just like his grandfather, only his materials were code encryption and firewalls. Jamal reached for the keyboard, but I raised one hand. We were not going to race into a maze before we understood how he had reached us. Every minute mattered, yet a missing fact could destroy the entire strategy. Before we open a single file, I said, "Tell us exactly how you escaped that house, what you heard after my phone call, and who was still inside when you left." Jamal looked from me to Marcus. For the first time since he entered the room, the discipline in his face cracked. He drew a slow breath, pulled out the chair opposite us, and began at the beginning. Jamal told us that the anniversary dinner had felt wrong from the moment he arrived. The dining room table was set for 6, but there were medical restraints folded inside a cabinet near the kitchen. Dr. Evans avoided looking at him. Richard Sterling carried a briefcase filled with tabs and signature flags, and Chloe kept checking the driveway camera every few minutes. Jamal had overheard Marc telling the transport crew that I might resist because confused patients often became aggressive. When Jamal challenged him, Marc took his car keys and ordered him upstairs. Marc said the adults were handling a private medical intervention and threatened to cut off Jamal's tuition if he interfered. Jamal pretended to surrender. From his bedroom, he used an old tablet to send the warning text because Marc had taken his phone. After our fake blowout call, Marc's control collapsed. He shouted at Chloe, accused Dr. Evans of failing to make me weak enough, and demanded that Sterling obtain an emergency order before morning. During the argument, Jamal slipped through the laundry room, climbed out a narrow window, and crossed 2 backyards before calling a rideshare under a classmate's account. He returned only long enough to recover his backpack from a side entrance and photograph the vehicles in the driveway. He placed those photographs on the table. Each image included the time and location. One showed the transport van's rear doors open, revealing a gurney fitted with wrist restraints. Another showed boxes of blank admission forms in the kitchen. A third captured Richard Sterling, handing Marc a document while Dr. Evans stood beside them. The evidence did not prove every element of the conspiracy, but it confirmed that the anniversary dinner had never been a family celebration. Jamal's voice remained controlled until he described the last thing he heard before leaving. Chloe had asked what would happen if the drugs caused permanent damage. Dr. Evans replied that permanent decline would only make the guardianship easier to defend. Marcus turned away. I reached across the table and closed the laptop for a moment. I wanted Jamal to understand that he was our grandson before he was our investigator. He had risked his safety to warn us, and the guilt on his face did not belong there. Marc had forced him to choose between obedience and conscience. Jamal had chosen correctly. He nodded, wiped his eyes, and reopened the computer. Then he told us something that shaped every decision afterward. Marc believed Jamal was frightened, financially dependent, and easy to control. He had no idea his son had copied the household records or heard the full plan. In Marc's mind, the only witnesses were people he had paid. That arrogance was our first advantage. Only after Jamal finished his account did we turn back to the computer. He created a secure hotspot for the burner phones, isolated the laptop from the motel network, and opened the copies of Marc's personal files that had synchronized to an old family tablet Marc had previously asked him to repair. Jamal did not enter the logistics company's live systems. He searched only the cloud folders, exported statements, cached messages, and household backups Marc had left accessible under credentials he reused across his personal devices. That limitation mattered. We needed evidence, not another crime that Sterling could exploit. I pulled a chair beside him and stated the first question plainly. We need to know exactly how deep his desperation goes. A man does not hire predatory lawyers and corrupt doctors just because he wants a bigger house. He does it because he is drowning. Find his liabilities, Jamal. Find the bottom of the ocean. Jamal nodded and pulled up a series of cascading windows from the synchronized backup. He moved carefully through Marc's own exported bank statements, tax folders, exchange receipts, and cashed account summaries. The room filled with the rapid clicking of the keyboard. For 15 minutes, nobody spoke. The silence was heavy with anticipation. I unboxed my burner phone, powered it up, and began manually entering the contact numbers for my trusted banking associates and legal advisors. I committed the numbers to memory long ago. An underwriter never relies solely on digital address books. Finally, Jamal let out a sharp breath. The sound was tight-laced with disbelief. He rotated the laptop screen toward Marcus and me. You were right about him drowning, Grandma, Jamal said, pointing to a massive spreadsheet filled with highlighted red columns. He is not just underwater. He is buried. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the financial documents displayed on the screen. My decades of experience allowed me to read the data like a simple storybook. The narrative unfolding before me was staggering. Marc and Chloe were living a complete lie. Their expensive country club memberships, the luxury vehicles, the designer wardrobes, none of it was paid for with actual liquid wealth. They were floating on a massive, unstable bubble of high-interest debt. But the credit card balances were just the surface. What is this secondary portfolio? I asked, tapping a finger against the glass of the screen. These transfer logs do not align with his salary as a logistics executive. They are outbound payments to offshore exchanges. Cryptocurrency. Jamal confirmed, bringing up another set of encrypted ledgers. Dad got heavily involved in a leveraged crypto trading syndicate about 18 months ago. He thought he could outsmart the market algorithms. I took out massive margin loans to amplify his trading positions, betting that the coin values would surge. But the market crashed. I deduced, tracing the catastrophic drop in asset value shown on a corresponding graph. The margin calls came due. He lost the initial investment and the borrowed capital. Exactly, Jamal said. He wiped out his entire savings, drained his 401k early with massive penalties, and liquidated Chloe's inherited trust fund. But that still did not cover the deficit. Look at the final total balance at the bottom of the ledger. I looked down. The number sat there bold and unyielding. Negative $1.5 million. Marcus let out a slow, ragged exhale. $1.5 million, he whispered. He has destroyed his entire future. He is trying to destroy ours to cover it, I reminded him, my voice turning to steel. Keep digging, Jamal. A standard bank does not issue $1 million unsecured loan for speculative crypto trading. Where did the capital come from? Jamal's fingers danced across the keys again. He pulled up a hidden subfolder labeled with a series of alphanumeric codes. He decrypted the contents, revealing scanned copies of private promissory notes. These were not standard banking contracts. They were typed on generic letterhead, featuring exorbitant interest rates that violated every state usury law in existence. The repayment terms were aggressive, demanding weekly wire transfers. This is shadow banking, I said, recognizing the structure immediately. These are unregulated bridge loans from private syndicates. Loan sharks. Dad borrowed money from very dangerous people, Jamal stated quietly, and he missed the last 3 payment deadlines. Look at the attached email correspondence. He opened a plain text email. The message was short, devoid of corporate pleasantries. It simply read, "Time is up, we collect the collateral by Friday, or we collect you." Friday. That was exactly 48 hours from now. The timeline snapped into brutal focus. Marc was not just greedy, he was fighting for his actual life. But what collateral could he possibly offer for a debt that massive? Marcus asked, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He owns nothing of actual value. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. My underwriting instincts fired rapidly, connecting the missing variables. Jamal, pull up the property records for our house on Riverside Drive. Check the county clerk portal for any recent title adjustments or lien filings. Jamal frowned but complied. He navigated to the public records database, entering our address. The loading icon spun for a few agonizing seconds before the property deed appeared on the screen. There, attached to the clean title we had held free and clear for 20 years, was a newly filed secondary lien. It was a massive collateral assignment, officially notarized and recorded just 3 days ago. The signatures at the bottom of the document belonged to Marcus and me. "They forged our names," Marcus said, his voice rising in anger. "He used our home to secure his illegal debt. They cannot enforce a forged lien," I stated, my mind racing through the legal implications. A standard title insurance company would flag the fraudulent signatures during the underwriting process. "But these are not standard lenders," Jamal pointed out, gesturing to the threatening email. "They do not care about the legality of the signature. They care about the asset. Dad promised them the house. But he knows he cannot legally transfer the deed or sell the property without our physical presence and consent," I said. Unless, of course, we were deemed mentally incompetent by a licensed medical professional. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The trap at the house, Dr. Evans with the medical transfer papers, the corrupt estate lawyer waiting with the power of attorney documents. Marc needed to be my legal conservator. He needed the legal authority to sign away the house and drain our remaining retirement accounts to pay off the syndicate. And he needed it done within 48 hours. If he failed, the people he borrowed from were going to come for him. "We are not dealing with a greedy son trying to secure an early inheritance," I said, looking from my husband to my grandson. "We are dealing with a desperate man who will stop at nothing to save his own skin. He is perfectly willing to throw us into a psychiatric ward to pay his debts. He is going to try to finalize that power of attorney tomorrow." Before we made a single call, we needed to understand how he planned to replace the money he had already lost and whether his employer's funds were part of the scheme. I looked at Jamal. "We have mapped the hole," I said. "Now show me what he threw into it." With Marc's personal losses and the forged lien mapped, Jamal opened a separate archive containing spreadsheets and vendor reports Marc had exported from work to his personal cloud. I stopped him before he went any further. "Do not enter the company's live server," I instructed. "We need to identify what Marc kept, then let federal investigators obtain the original records lawfully. A man hiding $1.5 million in crypto losses does not leave his employer untouched. He tries to plug private holes with corporate money." Jamal nodded and compared the exported files against the payment confirmations and email attachments already stored in Marc's backup. The records were incomplete, but they were enough to reveal a pattern. The screen populated with dense spreadsheets, vendor summaries, wire confirmations, and quarterly expenditure reports. My eyes scanned the data, translating the numerical codes into a clear narrative of financial desperation. Marc had indeed been skimming from his employer. He had set up a series of phantom vendor accounts funneling small, undetectable amounts of corporate logistics funds directly into his offshore crypto wallets. "Look at the dates on these phantom transfers," Marcus said, leaning closer to the screen. "They correlate exactly with the major dips in the cryptocurrency markets over the last fiscal year." He was trying to catch a falling knife, I observed, feeling a cold detachment replace any lingering maternal shock. Every time his digital assets plummeted, he stole more corporate cash to cover the margin calls. It is a classic underwriter's nightmare. He leveraged volatile assets against stolen capital. Jamal pulled up a secondary window displaying a cross-referenced list of IP addresses. "It gets worse. I am accessing Chloe's synchronized cloud drive. She kept a meticulously detailed digital planner for their social engagements." He opened a document labeled Country Club Renewals. The figures were staggering. Chloe had not adjusted her spending habits when the crypto market collapsed. Instead, she had accelerated her consumption. There were invoices for $50,000 gala sponsorships, luxury vehicle leases, and exclusive golf memberships. "She is funding a high society illusion with non-existent money," I stated, tapping the screen. "But these credit lines are maxed out. How are they paying the monthly minimums to avoid default?" Jamal executed another search query, digging into the metadata of Chloe's private correspondence. She opened 6 shadow credit cards using Dad's corporate tax identification number. She forged his executive signature to secure platinum tier limits. A house of cards built on a foundation of quicksand. Marcus murmured, his engineering mindset analyzing the inevitable collapse. "They are financially hollow. We need to find the exact origin point of the $1.5 million deficit," I directed Jamal. Corporate theft and maxed-out credit cards account for perhaps a third of this disaster. Where did the bulk of the crypto leverage come from? Jamal searched the deleted cache preserved in Marc's synchronized personal backup. I found remnants of a conversation from an encrypted messaging app, he said. Dad deleted the visible thread, but the device backup retained notification previews and attachment indexes. Lines of decrypted text cascaded down the monitor. The messages were exchanges between Marc and an anonymous broker operating under the handle Silas. "Read them aloud," I commanded. Jamal swallowed hard, his youthful face pale in the screen's glow. Silas offered Dad a proprietary algorithmic trading bot. He promised guaranteed returns on a highly volatile coin offering. Dad transferred $800,000 into the broker's wallet. Where did he get $800,000? Marcus demanded, his voice tight with rising anger. He liquidated his entire executive retirement package and took out a massive line of credit against his future logistics company equity, I calculated, seeing the financial suicide unfold in the raw data. He bypassed the standard waiting periods by paying exorbitant penalties. It was a complete liquidation. The trading bot was a scam. Jamal continued reading the subsequent messages. Silas drained the wallet within 48 hours. Dad lost everything in a single weekend. The remaining $700,000 of the debt accumulated through aggressive retaliatory trading. He borrowed from an underground syndicate to try and win back the initial losses. The gambler's fallacy, I noted with clinical precision. He chased his losses until he reached the bottom of the ocean. The sheer magnitude of the financial ruin was breathtaking. Marc and Chloe were not simply living beyond their means. They had orchestrated a multifaceted campaign of corporate theft, identity fraud, and reckless speculation. They had destroyed their own lives completely. He is facing federal embezzlement charges the moment his company conducts a routine audit, I stated. And Chloe is facing multiple counts of wire fraud. They have absolutely zero legitimate exit strategies, which is why they turned to the syndicate, Marcus added, his hands clenched into fists. They needed a massive influx of untraceable capital to replace the stolen corporate funds before the quarterly audit next month. Jamal traced the routing numbers for the offshore exchange, I directed, adjusting my reading glasses. I need to see exactly how he tried to wash the stolen corporate funds. Jamal cross-referenced the wallet addresses saved in Marc's receipts with publicly visible blockchain records. He used a mixing service routed through companies registered in the Cayman Islands. It mixes the cryptocurrency with thousands of other transactions to obscure the original source. He thought the obfuscation would protect him from the logistics firm's auditors. He forgot that blockchain technology acts as a permanent public ledger, I pointed out, shaking my head at my son's sheer arrogance. He essentially created a permanent map of his own embezzlement. Marcus stared at the cascading numbers, his expression darkening with every new revelation. How did he hide the missing capital from his company for this long? A logistics firm operates on tight margins. A deficit that massive should have triggered automated internal alarms immediately. The exported reports suggested he manipulated the account's receivable schedules, Jamal explained, opening a second spreadsheet from Marc's backup. He altered the payment schedules for their largest international shipping clients, marking massive invoices as delayed or pending dispute resolution. The money appeared to be legally tied up in transit delays, but in reality, it had already been drained to feed his crypto addiction. It is a classic Ponzi structure, I said, recognizing the fraudulent architecture. He is using new incoming capital to cover the missing balances of older accounts. But eventually the clients demand their delayed shipments, and the company demands the delayed revenue. The structure always collapses under its own weight. And the collapse is imminent, Jamal confirmed. A copied internal memo from the logistics firm's chief financial officer had been saved in Marc's work folder just yesterday. They are scheduling a comprehensive forensic audit of all pending international accounts for next week, which perfectly explains his current level of panic, I noted. He needs the syndicate loan to replace the missing corporate funds before the auditors arrive. If he fails, he goes to federal prison for a very long time. But the syndicate loan is secured by our house, Marcus reiterated, tracing the timeline of the impending disaster. And the syndicate will not release the capital without the power of attorney. He is trapped between federal prison and a violent cartel. Let us examine the forged deed, I commanded, pivoting back to the central threat against our property. I want to see the specific legal mechanisms he employed to bypass the county clerk's authentication protocols. Jamal returned to the county's public records portal and downloaded the high-resolution scans of the fraudulent property transfer. The documents appeared on the screen bearing perfect replicas of our signatures. He used a corrupt notary public Jamal identified, pointing to the official seal stamped at the bottom of the page. The notary's name is Victor Vance. He operates out of a storefront payday loan center downtown. I know of him, I said, my memory recalling a brief encounter from my underwriting days. He was investigated 5 years ago for authenticating fraudulent mortgage applications, but the charges were dropped due to a technicality. Marc must have paid him a significant bribe to backdate the transfer and bypass the mandatory waiting period. The deed lists the syndicate's holding company as the primary beneficiary in the event of default, Jamal added, highlighting the fine print buried on the third page of the contract. The terms state that if the principal balance is not repaid within 30 days, the property ownership reverts automatically to the holding company, waiving all standard foreclosure proceedings. It is a predatory seizure clause I evaluated, feeling a deep disgust for my son's willingness to hand our legacy over to criminals. He essentially sold our home to the cartel. But the cartel lawyers are smart, Marcus observed, studying the contract language. They know a forged signature on a deed can be challenged in court. They know we could tie the property up in endless civil litigation. Exactly, I agreed. That is why they are holding the funds in escrow. The forged deed is the bait, but the power of attorney is the hook. If Marc becomes our legal conservator, he gains the absolute authority to ratify the forged deed, making it perfectly legal and utterly unchallengeable. The syndicate gets a clean title, and Marc gets the money. The syndicate is not known for its patience, I said, leaning closer to the laptop. Jamal, can you intercept the live communications between your father and the lenders? Jamal nodded. Marc had left the messaging account paired to the old tablet, and new notification previews were still appearing in the synchronized backup. I can preserve whatever arrives without sending a reply, he said. A sudden sharp chime echoed from the computer speakers. A new encrypted message materialized on the screen in real time. It is from Silas Jamal, said his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. It is an automated countdown protocol. A digital timer appeared on the monitor, ticking down the seconds. The bold red numbers displayed 46 hours, 14 minutes, and 22 seconds. Beneath the timer was an attached image file. Jamal clicked the attachment. The image loaded, filling the screen with a high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of our house on Riverside Drive. The photo had been taken at night. A dark figure stood on our front lawn, holding a copy of that day's newspaper to verify the timestamp. They are physically monitoring our property. Marcus stated, his engineering mind assessing the tactical disadvantage. They have personnel deployed on the ground. Another message from Silas populated the chat log. Jamal read it aloud. The grace period has expired. We require the notarized conservatorship documents and the finalized property deed by the end of the countdown. Failure to deliver the collateral will result in immediate collection of the principal balance from your personal biology. Do not attempt to run. They are threatening to kill him, Jamal whispered, staring at the brutal text. They are promising to kill him, I corrected, maintaining my cold detachment. A threat implies a possibility of negotiation. A promise is a guarantee. The sheer desperation of Marc's situation escalated the danger for everyone involved. He was a cornered animal facing death from the syndicate and federal prison from his employer. He has 46 hours to legally incapacitate me. I calculated, checking the time on my burner phone. He knows our location is currently unknown. He will deploy every resource he possesses to find us before the syndicate acts. Jamal's laptop chimed again. Multiple alerts flooded the screen simultaneously. Dad is making moves. Jamal reported, his fingers flying across the trackpad to intercept the outgoing data packets. He is utilizing the dark web to hire a freelance tracking firm. He just uploaded the GPS coordinates of your last known cell phone ping. The SIM card I crushed, I noted. It will show our trajectory heading east, but it will not pinpoint this motel. He is also communicating with Dr. Evans and the estate lawyer, Jamal added, opening a new window displaying an active group chat. He is demanding they accelerate the legal filings. I leaned into the screen to read the intercepted dialogue. Marc's messages were frantic, filled with spelling errors and desperate demands. We need the ex parte motion filed at the courthouse the second it opens tomorrow morning, Marc wrote. Tell the judge they are a danger to themselves. Say they have gone completely senile and are wandering the streets. Get the emergency medical mandate signed. The lawyer responded immediately. I have a judge in my pocket who handles these emergency conservatorships quietly, but he requires Dr. Evans to submit a sworn affidavit confirming severe irreversible cognitive decline. The affidavit is already drafted, Dr. Evans replied in the chat. I documented the tremors and confusion caused by the supplements over the last 6 months. The medical history is airtight. Once the judge signs the order, the police will bring them in automatically. They are weaponizing the legal system against us, Marcus said, his voice rigid with controlled fury. They are going to use the police as their personal retrieval service. Once the judge signs that emergency mandate, we become wards of the state under Marc's control. I explained the underwriting risk assessment running at maximum capacity. Our bank accounts will be seized. Our property will be legally transferred to him, and we will be locked inside a medical facility with no legal right to leave. The clock is ticking much faster than 46 hours, Jamal warned, checking the system time. The courthouse opens in exactly 7 hours. Once that judge signs the mandate, the police will broadcast your faces to every precinct in the state. We have 7 hours of freedom, I stated, calculating the exact parameters of our survival window. After that, we are fugitives from a corrupt legal order. The reality of the ticking clock settled heavily over the cheap motel room. We were facing a synchronized assault from a violent underground syndicate, a corrupt legal apparatus, and a desperate, treacherous son. We did not need to make our money disappear. We needed to prove that Marc had no legal path to it. Months earlier, after Chloe began asking strangely specific questions about our passwords, property taxes, and the location of our original deed, Marcus and I had updated our estate plan. Most of our retirement portfolio and municipal bonds already sat inside a living trust administered jointly by us and an independent trust company. Marc was not a trustee, a beneficiary with present rights, or an authorized signer. The house remained in our names, but the trust documents contained an emergency fraud provision allowing the corporate co-trustee to suspend all transfers if either of us reported coercion identity theft or suspected incapacity fraud. I had never activated that provision because I had wanted to believe my uneasiness was only a mother's suspicion. Now belief no longer mattered. I called the trust company's 24-hour risk desk from the burner phone and identified myself using a verbal code that did not appear in any document Marc could steal. The officer on duty asked a sequence of questions about my first commercial account, the street where Marcus and I had met, and the private phrase written in our sealed estate instructions. I answered each one without hesitation. Then I reported forged signatures, coercion, suspected elder abuse, and a compromised physician. The officer placed an immediate dual authorization lock on every trust account. No withdrawal beneficiary change, collateral pledge, or trustee substitution could occur without an in-person review by the corporate fiduciary and independent counsel. Marcus called the title insurer that had protected our Riverside Drive purchase. He reported the fraudulent lien and requested an emergency title alert. The insurer could not erase a recorded document in the middle of the night, but it could mark the claim as disputed, preserve the original signature records, and notify the county fraud unit that any attempted transfer required enhanced verification. Jamal packaged the forged deed, the notary seal, and the threatening messages into a read-only archive. He generated verification hashes for every file so no one could later claim the evidence had been altered. We were not hiding assets offshore or placing them beyond lawful review. We were locking the doors that Marc had assumed were already open. The only accounts still exposed were our ordinary checking account, 2 personal credit cards, and a small brokerage account held outside the trust. A corrupt emergency order might freeze those funds before we could challenge it, but that would be an inconvenience rather than the destruction of our estate. More importantly, the freeze itself would become evidence. If Richard Sterling obtained a sweeping order without notice, based only on Dr. Evans's manufactured affidavit, the speed and breadth of the action would reveal exactly how deeply the conspiracy reached. I wrote 3 objectives on the motel notepad: protect the trust, preserve the evidence, force the conspirators to act in the open. Marcus read the words and placed his hand over mine. We had spent our careers preventing failures before they became catastrophes. This time, the structure under threat was our own life, and we were going to reinforce it one legal beam at a time. With the financial perimeter secured, I turned to the second half of Marc's plan, the medical story he had built around me. I opened my purse and removed the small amber bottle Chloe had pressed into my hand the previous Sunday. I had carried it with me because the capsules had begun to make me uneasy. The label claimed they contained an imported blend of turmeric collagen and herbal extracts, yet the bottle had no lot number, no manufacturer's address, and no tamper seal. I had stopped taking them 3 days earlier. My hands were already steadier. Jamal searched the intercepted messages for the name printed on the label. There was no legitimate supplier. Instead, he found a photograph Dr. Evans had sent Chloe showing a tray of unmarked capsules beside a handwritten dosing schedule. The schedule matched the dates of every appointment in which he had recorded my tremors, fatigue, and confusion. On days before a visit, Chloe had instructed me to take 2 capsules instead of 1. On days when Marcus accompanied me, she told me to skip breakfast so the medication would affect me more strongly. What I had thought was concern had been calibration. The discovery hurt more than the forged deed. Money was an object. A house could be repaired or replaced. But they had entered my body without my consent and used my trust as the delivery system. I remembered Chloe standing at my kitchen counter smiling while she poured me water. I remembered Marc calling afterward to ask whether I felt tired. I had interpreted those calls as affection. Now I understood that he had been checking whether the dosage worked. Marcus took the bottle from my hand and stared at it as if it were an explosive device. His anger was no longer loud. It had become frighteningly quiet. He wanted to drive straight to the nearest police station, but the silver alert had not yet appeared, and we knew Dr. Evans's records would initially carry more weight than our accusation. I told him we needed independent evidence before anyone could dismiss us as frightened parents blaming their son. Jamal photographed the bottle, the capsules, and the label under the motel lamp, then sealed the original inside a clean plastic food bag without touching the pills. I called a retired occupational health physician named Dr. Lena Foster, a woman who had evaluated executive fitness cases for my former firm and who had no connection to Dr. Evans. She answered on the 3rd ring. I gave her only the facts, unexplained neurological symptoms, a suspicious supplement, a physician documenting dementia, and an imminent guardianship petition. She did not diagnose me over the phone. Instead, she told us exactly how to preserve the bottle and arranged for a licensed toxicology laboratory to receive it through a federal evidence courier once Agent Davis became involved. She also asked me a series of orientation and memory questions, not as a formal examination, but as a contemporaneous record of my lucidity. I gave the date, location, recent market figures, details of our estate plan, and the sequence of events at Marc's house. Marcus recorded the call with her permission. Then Jamal opened this patient portal that Dr. Evans had allowed Chloe to manage. We did not need to break into a hospital network. Chloe had saved exported copies of my visit summaries, medication lists, and draft affidavits in a shared family folder on her own cloud account. Those files revealed the fraud in plain language. A draft dated 6 weeks earlier described me as unable to recognize Marcus, even though Dr. Evans had never tested that ability. Another claimed I had left the stove burning overnight, an incident that had never occurred. The metadata showed Chloe had edited the document before Dr. Evans signed it. The strongest evidence was a message from Marc: keep the symptoms visible until the anniversary. After that, the order will make everything clean. Dr. Evans replied with a thumbs-up symbol and a reminder to increase the dose before my final appointment. For the first time that night, Jamal looked away from the screen. His face was pale and his voice cracked when he apologized for not discovering the plan sooner. I told him the blame belonged only to the people who had designed it. He had done what Marc never expected. He had chosen conscience over obedience. Marcus crossed the room and pulled our grandson into an embrace. The 3 of us stood beneath the buzzing motel light, surrounded by cheap furniture and criminal evidence, holding one another long enough to remember that Marc had not destroyed the entire family. He had only exposed which parts of it were real. A sudden piercing alarm shattered the tense silence of the motel room. The sound was harsh, relentless, and unmistakably urgent. It did not come from my burner phone. It erupted from Jamal's personal device, vibrating violently on the laminate table. Jamal grabbed the phone, silencing the alarm. He stared at the screen, his expression shifting from surprise to absolute dread. "It is a silver alert," he announced, turning the screen toward us. The notification flashed in bright, authoritative text. It displayed our names, our ages, and a description of our vehicle. It identified us as critically endangered adults suffering from severe cognitive impairment who had wandered away from our son's home in a state of delirium. "He went to the police," Marcus stated, his voice tight. He is playing the terrified, devoted son. He is weaponizing law enforcement, I corrected, understanding the sheer audacity of his move. He cannot find us on his own before the syndicate deadline expires, so he is using the state police, the highway patrol, and every citizen with a smartphone as his personal search party. The alert includes a physical description and the license plate number of your car. Jamal read, scrolling through the detailed notification. It instructs anyone who spots you to contact local authorities immediately and warns that you may be disoriented and hostile. If a patrol car spots our license plate, they will pull us over, Marcus deduced, outlining the immediate operational threat. The alert itself was not an arrest warrant, but officers would approach us as endangered adults and could place us in protective transport before they understood the fraud. They might hear our explanation yet. Dr. Evans's records and Marc's report had been prepared to make every denial sound like confusion. They will take us for an emergency evaluation, I added, feeling the net tighten around us. And Dr. Evans will push the receiving physician toward an involuntary hold, Jamal concluded. He cannot impose it alone, but his affidavit and false history could heavily influence the decision. Once we are secured in a locked ward, Marc brings the emergency ex parte motion to the judge. I finalize the sequence. The judge sees 2 missing seniors apprehended by police and committed by their doctor. The conservatorship is granted instantly. The trap closes perfectly. The small motel room suddenly felt claustrophobic. We were no longer simply hiding from a desperate son and a violent syndicate. We were actively being hunted by the entire state apparatus, fueled by a fabricated medical crisis. We cannot use the car, Marcus decided, moving toward the window and peering through the gap in the curtains. If a cruiser drives past this motel and runs the plates, they will pinpoint our location in seconds. We are immobilized. Jamal agreed, his fingers resting on the keyboard. Dad effectively cut off our physical escape routes, but he also exposed his timeline, I analyzed, refusing to succumb to the rising panic. Filing a false police report is a massive escalation. He is terrified. The syndicate deadline is paralyzing him. He made a loud public move because he is out of quiet options. We are still trapped, Marcus reminded me, his practical nature demanding an immediate solution. The police are actively searching for us. Then we need to become invisible, I stated, opening the dial pad on my burner phone. We abandon the car. We stay entirely off the public grid. And we execute the financial counterstrike before the police knock on this door. I looked at the glowing numbers on the laptop screen. The countdown timer set by the syndicate continued to tick downward, relentless and unforgiving. Marc was running out of time, but so were we. Jamal, I instructed, my tone shifting into pure executive command focus on the immediate digital threats. Monitor the police scanner frequencies for any mention of our vehicle or our names. Marcus, gather our essential belongings. We need to be ready to move on foot if the perimeter collapses. The game had fundamentally changed. It was no longer a matter of avoiding detection. It was a race to dismantle an entire criminal infrastructure while actively evading a state-sponsored manhunt. I held the burner phone tightly, the plastic edge biting into my palm. My son wanted to erase me, but I was about to rewrite his entire existence. I told Jamal to gather his equipment immediately. We had a brief window before the police expanded their search grid to the outskirts of the city. I needed eyes inside my own home before Marc arrived to pillage the physical documents he believed were stored there. Jamal unzipped the heavy black backpack and laid out a series of matte black containers on the motel bed. He opened them to reveal 4 micro-surveillance cameras. They were no larger than a standard shirt button, designed for corporate espionage, completely undetectable to the naked eye. I gave him the security bypass codes for the rear entrance of our property. I detailed the exact layout of the blind spots in the neighborhood watch perimeter. He dressed in dark clothing, pulled a dark knit cap over his head, and slipped out the motel door into the damp night air. Marcus and I sat in silence, watching the digital clock on the laptop screen tick forward. I tracked Jamal's progress via a secure geolocation link he shared with my burner phone. He avoided the main highways, navigating through the commercial industrial zones to bypass the license plate readers the state police were currently monitoring. When his location dot stopped 2 streets away from our house, I knew he was proceeding on foot through the wooded creek bed that bordered our backyard. 10 minutes later, a notification popped up on the laptop screen. A secure video feed established a connection. The image resolved into a crisp night vision view of my master bedroom. Jamal had successfully infiltrated the house. I watched his hands move swiftly across the screen. He embedded the first camera inside the housing of the ceiling smoke detector, tapping directly into the continuous power supply of the house wiring. It provided a sweeping, unobstructed view of the entire room, from the heavy oak wardrobe to the king-sized bed. He moved silently out of the frame. 2 minutes later, a second video feed materialized on the laptop. This one displayed my home office. The angle was positioned high on the wall, looking down over the mahogany desk and the built-in bookshelves. Jamal had concealed the lens within the spine of a thick, leather-bound legal dictionary on the top shelf. The microphone array activated, sending the ambient silence of my empty house directly into our motel room. I pressed the transmission button on the burner phone. "The cameras are perfectly aligned," I whispered into the receiver. "Proceed to the wall safe behind the center bookshelf panel. Open it using the master override code I provided." Jamal moved into the frame of the office camera. He removed the wooden panel and punched the sequence into the digital keypad of the steel safe. The heavy locking bolts retracted with a soft click. He opened the door. The safe was entirely empty. I had removed the bearer bonds and the original property deeds months ago, moving them to a secure vault downtown when my initial suspicions about Chloe had first begun to take root. "Take the piece of stationery from your pocket," I instructed. "Place it directly in the center of the bottom shelf. Lock the safe and exit the property immediately. The neighborhood patrols change shifts at 4 in the morning." Jamal placed the folded piece of cream-colored paper inside the steel box. He closed the door, engaged the locking mechanism, and replaced the wooden panel. He disappeared from the camera feed. 20 minutes later, the heavy deadbolt of our motel room slid back, and Jamal stepped safely inside. We had established our surveillance network. We had secured the perimeter. Now we simply had to wait for the rats to enter the maze. The waiting did not last long. At exactly 5 in the morning, the audio feed from the home office camera picked up the harsh mechanical grinding of a heavy drill. They were not attempting to use the keypad. They were boring directly through the reinforced deadbolt of my front door. Marc did not have my keys, and he was too impatient to hire a discreet locksmith. The heavy door crashed open, the sound echoing violently through the empty house. Heavy footsteps pounded across the hardwood floors of the foyer. The screen on the laptop split into 2 active feeds. Marc and Chloe burst into the master bedroom. They did not bother to turn on the overhead lights. They wielded heavy industrial flashlights, the harsh white beams cutting wildly through the darkness. They moved with the frantic, uncoordinated energy of desperate thieves. Chloe marched directly to my antique vanity. She swept her arm across the polished surface, sending crystal perfume bottles and silver-framed photographs crashing to the floor. The glass shattered loudly, but she did not even flinch. She pulled the drawers out completely, dumping my silk scarves and personal letters into a tangled pile on the rug. Marc moved to the walk-in closet, ripping my clothes from their hangers, searching for hidden compartments in the drywall. They were tearing my history apart with their bare hands. Chloe moved to the bed. She grabbed the edge of the heavy mattress and shoved it violently off the box spring. It slammed against the bedside table, snapping the wooden leg. She dropped to her knees, tearing at the fabric backing of the box spring with her manicured fingernails. "Nothing," she screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the microphone. "There is nothing here." She stood up, her face distorted with a vicious, ugly rage that the night vision camera captured in perfect detail. She kicked a shattered picture frame across the room. "The old bats should have died already to make this easier," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysterical frustration. "Why will they not just die and leave us the money?" Marcus stiffened beside me in the motel room. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Watching the woman our son had chosen to marry openly demand our deaths was a profound violation. I placed my hand firmly over his wrist. I did not react. I did not look away from the screen. "Let her destroy the furniture," I said softly. "We are watching them document their own criminal intent. Every broken mirror is another piece of evidence." Marc abandoned the closet and stormed out of the bedroom camera feed. Seconds later, he burst into the home office. He threw his heavy flashlight onto my mahogany desk. The beam illuminated the center bookshelf. He grabbed the wooden panel and ripped it away from the wall, tossing it carelessly over his shoulder. It smashed into a glass display cabinet, sending shards raining down onto the rug. He stared at the steel face of the safe. He pulled a heavy steel pry bar and a cordless angle grinder from a duffel bag he carried over his shoulder. He did not know the combination, and he did not care. He was operating on pure adrenaline-fueled panic. He activated the grinder. Sparks flew wildly across the room as the abrasive disc bit deeply into the hardened steel hinges of the safe door. The noise was deafening through the laptop speakers. I watched my son sweat. His designer shirt was soaked. His face was twisted in a desperate grimace. For 20 minutes he cut and pried at the metal, destroying the wall surrounding the safe in the process. The heavy steel door finally groaned and snapped off its hinges. It crashed onto the floor, crushing the wooden floorboards. Marc dropped the tools and fell to his knees. He reached both hands eagerly into the dark cavity of the safe. He expected to pull out stacks of municipal bonds. I expected to find the original property deeds he needed to satisfy the underground syndicate. He expected salvation. Instead, his hands found nothing. He felt the cold steel walls. He patted the bottom shelf frantically. His fingers brushed against the single piece of cream-colored stationery Jamal had left behind. Marc pulled the paper out into the light of the flashlight. He unfolded it with trembling fingers. I watched his eyes scan the words I had written in my perfect looping cursive. "I know exactly what you are looking for, Marc." The silence in the office was absolute. The grinding noise had stopped. Chloe had gone quiet in the other room. Marc stared at the paper. His chest heaved with heavy, ragged breaths. The realization that I was entirely aware of his betrayal finally crashed down upon him. He slowly stood up. He crumpled the stationery into a tight ball and threw it at the wall. Then he lost his mind. A guttural, animalistic scream erupted from his throat. He grabbed the heavy steel pry bar from the floor. He swung it violently at my desk, smashing the polished wood and obliterating my computer monitor. He turned to the bookshelves, sweeping the heavy iron bar across the rows of leather-bound books, sending them cascading to the floor. He smashed the overhead lighting fixtures. He tore the heavy curtains from their rods. He moved methodically around the room, destroying every physical object within his reach, acting out a terrifying tantrum of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew the syndicate was coming for him. He knew the collateral was gone, and he knew his mother had outsmarted him. Marc finally dropped the pry bar. He stood in the center of the ruined office, panting heavily. The camera captured the absolute despair settling into his posture. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. The audio feed picked up the electronic dialing tones. He held the phone to his ear, pacing nervously through the debris. "Pick up the phone, Richard," he muttered anxiously. The corrupt estate lawyer answered on the fourth ring. "We have a massive problem," Marc barked into the receiver. "The safe is completely empty. The physical deeds are gone. She knew I was coming." The lawyer's voice was faint but audible through the sensitive microphone array. "It does not matter if the physical papers are missing," the lawyer replied smoothly. "The county recorder relies on digital verification. We just need the legal authority to sign on her behalf. Did the police locate them yet?" "No," Marc shouted, kicking a fallen book across the room. "The silver alert generated nothing. They are hiding." "Then we force them into the light," the lawyer instructed coldly. "I am finalizing the ex parte motion right now." Dr. Evans signed the medical affidavits declaring them both fully incapacitated and a severe danger to the public. "I am submitting the paperwork to Judge Harrison immediately. He will sign the emergency mandate based on their sudden disappearance." "What does that accomplish if I cannot find them?" Marc demanded. "It cuts off their oxygen," the lawyer answered. "The mandate includes an immediate judicial freeze request directed to every bank and brokerage Sterling identified. The court's electronic service system will notify the institutions before breakfast. They will not be able to buy a gallon of gas or rent a hotel room. Hunger and exposure will flush them out. You will have full conservatorship by noon." Marc ended the call. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the ruined safe. Back in the motel room, I turned to Jamal. "Open the primary banking portals on a secure browser," I instructed. We watched the laptop screen closely. Jamal logged into my main checking account interface. The balance displayed a healthy figure in bright green numbers. Then the screen flickered. A spinning loading icon appeared in the center of the page. When the interface refreshed, the green numbers had turned a dull, lifeless gray. A thick red banner dropped across the top of the banking portal. "Account frozen by emergency judicial order. Please contact your branch administrator." Jamal opened the small brokerage account we held outside the trust. The same red banner appeared. Our 2 credit card portals showed temporary suspension notices. When he checked the trust company, the message was different. "Fraud lock active. No transfer permitted." The court had not captured the municipal bonds or retirement funds because the independent trustee had already sealed them. But the protective lock also meant we could not draw cash from them that morning. Marc had weaponized the judicial system against our ordinary financial life while failing to reach the estate itself. We were not ruined, but we had been cut off from every convenient source of money at the exact moment we needed mobility. I stepped out of the motel room and pulled the collar of my heavy coat tightly around my neck to block the biting morning wind. The broken asphalt of the empty parking lot was incredibly slick with a very fresh layer of cold autumn rain. I kept my head angled downward to avoid the line of sight of the scattered security cameras mounted on the neighboring industrial buildings. I needed provisions to sustain us through the next phase of our operation. 2 blocks east of the Motor Inn sat a rundown convenience store with flickering fluorescent lights and metal bars on the windows. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The rusted bell above it announced my arrival with a dull chime. The young male cashier did not even bother to look up from his glowing mobile device. The air inside the store was stale and smelled of artificial vanilla and old cardboard. I walked directly to the back aisles and picked up a plastic handbasket. We required dense calories and secure communication lines. I loaded the basket with 6 large bottles of purified water, a dozen high-protein meal replacement bars, and a loaf of plain white bread. I navigated to the electronics display located behind a locked plastic case. I signaled the cashier to open the cabinet. I selected 4 prepaid cellular minutes cards, each loaded with the maximum allowable denomination. I carried the heavy basket to the front counter and set it down on the scratched laminate surface. The cashier scanned each item with slow and methodical apathy. The total flashed on the digital display register amounting to $84.17. I retrieved my primary debit card from my leather wallet. I inserted the card into the chip reader, watching the small screen process the transaction. The machine beeped once. The screen flashed a red error code indicating the transaction was declined. I frowned and pulled the card out, wiping the metallic chip on my coat sleeve. I inserted it a second time. The machine hummed for a fraction of a second before emitting the exact same sharp beep. The cashier finally looked at me and pulled one earphone off his head. "Your bank blocked the transaction." He stated, his voice flat and completely disinterested. I withdrew my secondary credit card, a platinum account with an impeccable payment history and a massive available balance. I swiped the magnetic strip through the reader. The digital processing icon spun rapidly. The terminal buzzed angrily with a message that the card was suspended. I felt a sudden and suffocating pressure constrict my chest. The judicial freeze was absolute and immediate. Marc and his corrupt lawyer had successfully executed their legal maneuver. They had turned my pristine financial reputation into a locked vault that I could no longer access. I reached into the hidden zippered compartment of my wallet and extracted a crisp $100 bill. It was one of the 3 remaining large denomination notes Marcus had kept in his money clip for extreme emergencies. I handed the paper currency to the cashier. He scrutinized the bill under a counterfeit detection light before handing me my meager change. I gathered the plastic grocery bags, the handles biting painfully into my fingers. We now possessed exactly $215 to our names. I walked out of the store and retraced my steps through the cold rain. The physical reality of our destitution settled heavily onto my shoulders. We could not purchase any expensive airline tickets. We could not rent a secure safe house. We could not even afford to repair a slightly broken vehicle. The state had stripped me of my resources and left me entirely vulnerable to my son's predatory machinations. I unlocked the motel room door and stepped inside, setting the heavy bags on the floor. Marcus looked up from the table where Jamal was still typing furiously. "Your bank cards are dead," Marcus stated, reading the grim confirmation on my face. I placed the remaining cash on the laminate table. "This is our entire operating budget," I announced, pulling off my damp coat. "Marc thinks this lack of capital will force us to surrender. He expects the discomfort to break our resolve." I picked up one of the prepaid phone cards and scratched off the silver security foil with my fingernail. "We are not going to surrender. We are going to escalate." I looked at Jamal and told him to boot up the encrypted communication relay. I requested a direct and untraceable line to the federal building in downtown Seattle. Jamal took the prepaid card from my hand and rapidly inputted the authorization codes into his specialized software interface. He established a secure voice connection through the burner hotspot and verified that the call would not expose the motel address through our personal accounts. The line is secure and the voice encryption is active, Jamal confirmed, handing me the burner phone. I dialed a specific 10-digit number that I had memorized 22 years ago. I did not dial the public switchboard for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I dialed the direct desk line of Special Agent Thomas Davis. Decades prior, when I was a senior underwriter handling massive commercial portfolios, I had noticed a complex web of shell companies artificially inflating property values in a downtown revitalization project. I had compiled the discrepancies into a comprehensive dossier and handed it directly to a young and ambitious investigator named Davis. That dossier had dismantled a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation and effectively launched his career in the Financial Crimes Division. The phone rang 3 times before a deep and gravelly voice answered. Davis speaking. Thomas, I said, maintaining a brisk and authoritative cadence. This is Vivian. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute for 5 long seconds. Vivian Davis finally responded, his tone shifting from professional detachment to immediate alert. I just received a statewide bulletin bearing your name and photograph. The local authorities have issued a silver alert claiming you are suffering from severe dementia and have wandered away from a care facility. It states you are highly disoriented and potentially dangerous. The alert is a fabricated weapon, I countered smoothly, cutting straight through the bureaucratic noise. I am in full possession of my mental faculties. My son has orchestrated a massive and fraudulent conservatorship campaign to illegally seize my assets. He is utilizing a corrupt local judge, a compromised physician named Dr. Evans, and a predatory estate lawyer to execute this scheme. Davis did not ask for clarification. He understood the mechanical nature of financial predators. Why is he taking such extreme measures to liquidate your estate? Because he is currently facing execution by an underground lending syndicate, I explained, laying out the brutal facts of the situation without hesitation. Marc embezzled over $1 million from his corporate logistics firm to cover catastrophic losses in leveraged cryptocurrency markets. He attempted to replace the stolen corporate funds by taking out a high-interest bridge loan from a violent shadow banking cartel. He secured that illegal loan by forging my signature and Marcus's signature on a fraudulent property deed using our fully paid-off home as collateral. The syndicate has given him a 48-hour deadline to finalize the legal transfer of the property, or they will collect his life. I heard the sharp and rhythmic tapping of a pen against a desk on the other end of the connection. You are telling me your son leveraged your home to an organized crime syndicate, Davis verified, summarizing the crisis, and he is utilizing the state judicial system to force the asset transfer. I am not just telling you, I am providing you with the complete digital framework of the entire criminal enterprise. I looked at Jamal and nodded my head. Jamal initiated the file transfer sequence. I am sending a heavily encrypted data packet to your secure federal Dropbox right now, I informed the agent. The packet contains the decrypted chat logs between Marc and the syndicate broker known as Silas. It contains the forged property deeds featuring the fraudulent notary stamp. It includes the wallet addresses, wire confirmations, and company records Marc saved while attempting to conceal the stolen corporate funds. It also contains the internal communication logs between Marc, the corrupt lawyer, and the compromised doctor, proving premeditated medical fraud. Davis remained silent as he accessed his secure terminal. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard as he opened the files Jamal was transmitting. The volume of evidence is substantial, Vivian. Where did you acquire this documentation? My grandson is studying cybersecurity, I replied. Marc left personal backups, exported work files, and a paired messaging account on equipment Jamal had previously repaired. We preserved what was already synchronized, and we have not altered the source systems. We have absolute proof of the embezzlement, the wire fraud, the forged signatures, and the impending cartel intervention. Thomas, the local police, are actively hunting me right now based on a fraudulent medical mandate. If they apprehend me, they will deliver me directly into a locked psychiatric facility under my son's legal control. I need federal intervention, and I need it immediately. I read through the syndicate communication logs, Davis stated, his voice dropping into a harsh and tactical register. The broker operating under the handle, Silas, is affiliated with a major money laundering operation we have been attempting to dismantle for 3 years. Your son did not just borrow money from local thugs. He engaged with a highly sophisticated transnational criminal organization. The threat against his life is entirely credible. That is his burden to bear, I responded, displaying zero maternal sympathy. My primary objective is the protection of my husband, my grandson, and my legacy. The local judge has already frozen my legitimate banking assets. I am operating with zero liquid capital. I cannot fight a state-sanctioned conservatorship from a cheap motel room while running from patrol cars. You do not have to fight the local jurisdiction, Davis assured me, the sound of chair wheels rolling across the floor echoing through the speaker. A federal criminal investigation would give Davis a lawful path to challenge the local civil order and protect the evidence. I am mobilizing a financial crimes task force immediately. We will secure warrants for the arrest of your son, the doctor, and the lawyer based on the interstate wire fraud evidence you just provided. I will dispatch agents to intercept the local police search grids and countermand the silver alert. Do not engage the local authorities. I interrupted a new and far more devastating strategy forming in my mind. If you arrest Marc now, the syndicate will vanish into the shadows and my son will simply play the victim of a misunderstanding. I want to dismantle his entire operation at the exact moment he believes he has won. I want to draw the corrupt lawyer and the fraudulent doctor into the same room. I want to hand you the entire criminal conspiracy on a silver platter. Davis paused, processing the tactical pivot. What exactly are you proposing? I am going to let the local police find me, I revealed, looking at Marcus, who nodded in silent agreement. I am going to let them transport me directly into Marc's custody. I will walk willingly into the trap he has built. I need you to assemble your tactical units and wait for my signal. When the time is right, you will breach the house and execute the federal warrants. Agent Davis did not accept my proposal immediately. He warned me that returning to Marc's house carried genuine risk and that federal agents could not use us as bait without safeguards. I agreed. I was not asking to improvise a rescue. I was asking for a controlled surrender in which every step would be documented and every exit would be covered. For the next 40 minutes, Davis and Jamal built the operation together. The task force would not rely on the hacked corporate files alone. Davis obtained expedited preservation requests for Marc's personal accounts, the title records, the trust company's fraud report, and the messages routed through the syndicate broker. He contacted Marc's employer through its general counsel and asked the company to secure its accounting servers without alerting Marc. The firm confirmed that suspicious vendor payments existed and agreed to provide lawful copies under emergency process. That independent evidence transformed our allegations from a family dispute into a federal financial conspiracy. A courier working with the task force collected the sealed supplement bottle from a location Jamal designated 2 blocks away. Dr. Foster agreed to meet the courier at the toxicology laboratory and witness the chain of custody. Preliminary screening would not be finished before we entered the house, but the bottle, the dosing messages, and the fabricated medical notes were enough to support warrants for evidence preservation. Davis also arranged for an assistant United States attorney to review the operation in real time. He wanted no ambiguity about why agents would enter Marc's home. Jamal fitted a small recorder inside the seam of my coat and a second one beneath Marcus's shirt collar. The devices transmitted live audio to the task force and stored local copies in case the signal failed. A pressure switch sewn into my left pocket served as the emergency signal. 3 presses meant immediate entry. 1 long press meant wait and continue recording. If Marc separated Marcus and me, threatened either of us with a weapon, attempted an injection, or tried to move us to another location, the agents would intervene without waiting for a confession. The temporary guardianship order posed another problem. Davis could not simply erase a state court document because we claimed it was corrupt. Instead, he notified the state attorney general's elder abuse unit that a federal investigation involved forged medical records and a potentially compromised judge. The unit placed a sealed notice in the statewide law enforcement system instructing officers who located us to confirm our physical safety and notify a federal contact. The notice did not cancel the silver alert because doing so would warn Marc. It ensured that the officers who found us would unknowingly deliver 2 protected witnesses into a monitored scene rather than 2 helpless seniors into private custody. I asked Davis what would happen to Judge Harrison. He said the evidence against the judge was not yet strong enough for an arrest. Richard Sterling's message about having a judge in his pocket might have been bragging. The emergency order could also have been obtained through selective fax rushed procedure and a forged affidavit rather than a direct bribe. We would let the records decide. That answer mattered to me. Revenge built on assumptions would make me no better than the people trying to erase us. I wanted every accusation proved. Before ending the call, Davis made me repeat the safety rules. Do not eat or drink anything in the house. Do not allow Marc to take either of us upstairs. Keep the dining room door visible. Press the switch the moment a syringe, firearm restraint, or transport crew appeared. I repeated each instruction. Then I asked the question I had avoided all night. If Marc breaks down and begs me to protect him, what do I do? Davis was silent for a moment. Then he answered in the same steady voice he had used 22 years earlier when I handed him the first fraud dossier of his career. Tell the truth, nothing more and nothing less. After the call ended, Marcus and I sat together on the edge of the motel bed. He asked whether I was certain. I told him I was terrified, which was not the same as uncertain. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was the decision that something else mattered more. Our freedom mattered more. Jamal's future mattered more. The chance to expose the doctor and lawyer in the same room mattered more. We destroyed no evidence, altered no records, and made no promises of leniency. We simply prepared to let Marc reveal himself. We took our positions and waited for the search to reach us. The heavy pounding on the motel room door shattered the quiet rhythm of our work. The wooden frame rattled under the force of the blows. Outside the thin curtains, the harsh glare of red and blue. Emergency lights sliced through the cold rain, casting erratic shadows across the peeling wallpaper. The local police had found us. The silver alert had done its job. Jamal froze, his hands hovering over the keyboard. His eyes darted from the glowing screen to the locked door. I did not panic. I had anticipated this moment from the instant Marc weaponized the state registry. The trust was locked. The title dispute was recorded and the evidence was preserved. Now the priority was physical safety. Marcus and I would enter the controlled scene. Jamal had to reach the federal team without being seen. "Pack the equipment," I whispered to my grandson, my voice perfectly level. "You are leaving through the small bathroom window. Drop into the alley, use the drainage ditch to circle toward the main road, and confirm your position to Agent Davis as soon as you are clear. Keep the laptop dry, preserve every recording, and do not attempt to follow the police cruiser." Jamal did not argue. He moved with silent urgency, sweeping the laptop, the burner phones, and the cables into his dark backpack. He stepped into the cramped bathroom, slid the frosted glass window upward, and disappeared into the rainy night without making a sound. The pounding on the main door intensified. A loud, authoritative voice boomed through the cheap exterior wall. "Police department, open the door immediately." Marcus moved to unlatch the chain, his body rigid with defensive tension. I reached out and caught his arm. I looked up into his eyes and communicated the shift in our strategy. We were no longer fighting. We were surrendering. But we were surrendering on my terms. "Let me handle this," I instructed him quietly. "Follow my lead. We are exactly what they expect us to be. We are confused. We are tired. We are lost." I reached up and deliberately pulled the pins from my hair, letting it fall in messy, uneven strands around my face. I unbuttoned the top button of my blouse and pulled my heavy wool coat loosely over my shoulders, making it look as though I had dressed in a hurried panic. I slumped my shoulders forward, abandoning my usual perfect posture. I let my jaw go slack and allowed a vacant, frightened expression to wash over my features. In a matter of seconds, the sharp, calculating underwriter vanished. In her place stood a frail, disoriented woman in the throes of severe cognitive decline. I nodded to Marcus. He unfastened the deadbolt and slowly pulled the door open. Two police officers stood on the wet concrete walkway, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Rain dripped from the brims of their hats. The younger officer stepped forward, a heavy flashlight in his hand. The beam swept across the room, illuminating the empty beds and the discarded coffee cups before settling on my face. Vivian and Marcus, the officer, asked, his tone shifting immediately from aggressive command to cautious sympathy. I blinked repeatedly, squinting against the harsh light of the flashlight. I raised a trembling hand to my face, perfectly mimicking the erratic movements of a dementia patient. I took a small, unsteady step backward, pressing myself against Marcus. "Who are you?" I asked, pitching my voice to tremble with authentic-sounding fear. "Why are the lights so bright? Where is my house? I need to go back to my house." The second officer, an older woman with kind eyes, lowered her flashlight and stepped into the doorway. She held her hands up in a placating gesture. "It is completely all right, Vivian," the female officer said softly. You are safe. Your son Mark has been looking everywhere for you. He is very worried. He filed a report saying you both got confused and wandered away from home. Mark, I repeated, letting my voice crack, sounding desperately relieved. Where is my boy? I need my son. He told me to wait in the living room, but I could not find the living room. Everything looks wrong here. Marcus wrapped an arm around my waist, leaning into the performance. He adopted a slow, shuffled gait, looking down at his shoes, as if he could not comprehend his surroundings. My wife is very tired, Marcus murmured to the officers. We have been trying to find the highway. The road keeps changing. The officers exchanged a meaningful, sympathetic glance. The narrative Marc had constructed was flawless, and our performance cemented it into absolute reality. The police did not see two targets. They saw two victims of a deteriorating mind. Let us get you out of the cold, the older officer suggested gently. We are going to put you in the back of our warm car, and we will take you straight back to your son. He is waiting for you. I allowed the officer to take my arm. I leaned heavily against her, letting her support my weight as we walked through the cold rain toward the waiting cruiser. The back seat was made of hard plastic, but the heater was running on full blast. Marcus slid in beside me. The doors closed with a heavy thud, engaging the child safety locks. We were secured in the back of a police vehicle, completely stripped of our agency. The cruiser pulled out of the motel parking lot, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. I stared blankly out the reinforced window, maintaining my vacant expression for the rearview mirror, where the driving officer occasionally checked on us. Inside my mind, however, the gears were turning with lethal precision. The first phase of the counterstrike was complete. We had successfully infiltrated the enemy lines. We were being delivered directly into the trap. The drive took exactly 42 minutes. The rain turned into a steady downpour as we navigated the affluent streets of Stonecrest. The police cruiser finally turned into Marc's long driveway, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet, manicured lawns and the tall maple trees. The three hidden vehicles were still parked by the service entrance: the medical transport van, the lawyer's luxury sedan, and the doctor's sport utility vehicle. The players were all assembled. The stage was set. The police cruiser came to a smooth stop directly in front of the massive oak doors of my son's house. Before the officer could even shift the vehicle into park, the front door burst open. Marc rushed down the wet concrete steps, playing his role for the authorities with sickening perfection. He wore a rumpled sweater and had strategically messed up his hair to look like a man who had spent the entire night agonizing over his missing parents. Chloe trailed closely behind him, clutching a tissue to her face, performing the role of the weeping, relieved daughter-in-law. "Mom, Dad," Marc cried out, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet, rainy neighborhood. The officers unlocked the back doors of the cruiser and helped us step out into the rain. Marc rushed forward and threw his arms around my shoulders in a crushing embrace. I stood perfectly still, letting my arms hang limply by my sides, maintaining the vacant stare of a woman whose mind had fractured. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. I could feel the rigid, violent tension coiled in his muscles beneath his sweater. He was not hugging a mother. He was securing his collateral. "Thank you, officer," Marc said, pulling back and vigorously shaking the young policeman's hand. "I cannot express how grateful I am. They have been declining so rapidly. We were terrified they had wandered onto the highway. We are moving them into a specialized care facility tomorrow morning, but we just needed them back safe tonight." "You did the right thing calling the alert," the older female officer replied, her voice full of genuine pity. "Get them inside and get them warm. They are very disoriented. We will take wonderful care of them," Chloe added, stepping forward to link her arm tightly through Marcus's arm. "Come inside, Dad. Let us get you out of this awful weather." The police officers returned to their cruiser. Marc wrapped a heavy arm around my waist, his fingers digging painfully into my ribs. He physically guided me up the front steps. We crossed the threshold into the grand foyer of the house. I watched the police cruiser back down the driveway, its taillights glowing bright red in the rain. The vehicle turned onto the main road and disappeared from view. We were completely alone. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind us. The sound echoed through the vast vaulted ceiling of the foyer. The metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place was sharp and definitive. Marc reached up and engaged a secondary security chain high on the door frame. He turned the lock on the handle. The performance was over. The theater had closed its doors. The moment the deadbolt clicked behind us, I felt the recorder against my coat seam vibrate once. The signal was still live. Somewhere beyond the walls, Agent Davis and his team could hear the change in Marc's voice, the scrape of Chloe's nails against my handbag, and the false tenderness disappearing from the room. I kept my face slack and my eyes unfocused, but every sense sharpened. The foyer looked different from the way it had the night before. A section of carpet near the stairs had been rolled back, revealing drag marks on the hardwood where the transport crew had positioned a gurney. A folded restraint belt lay on a console table beneath a vase of white lilies. On the wall, family photographs had been arranged to create a history of devotion. Marc at his graduation, Marc holding Jamal as a baby, Marc standing between Marcus and me at our 30th anniversary. The display was not love. It was scenery for the story he planned to tell police doctors and judges. Marcus stumbled convincingly when Chloe pulled him forward, but his hand brushed mine twice. It was our private signal from 40 years of marriage. I am steady. I am here. I answered with one squeeze. We did not need to speak. Marc ordered the transport crew to remain in the kitchen until he called. One of the men asked whether the patients had been medically cleared. Richard Sterling's voice answered from the dining room that the paperwork was complete. The hesitation in the crewman's reply told me not everyone in the house understood the full plan. That mattered. Witnesses who believed they were performing legitimate work could later explain what Marc had told them. Chloe found the remaining cash in my wallet and laughed. She held the bills up to the chandelier, as if she had discovered proof of my helplessness. Marc told her to stop wasting time. Their argument exposed the pressure between them. Chloe blamed him for losing the money. Marc blamed her spending. Each tried to establish a version in which the other had created the crisis. I listened and stored every sentence. As Marc pushed us toward the dining room, I pressed the switch in my pocket once and held it. Wait, continue recording. Davis would know we were still together, and no immediate weapon had appeared. The hardest part of the plan was not entering the trap. It was resisting the urge to end it too early. A rushed arrest might capture Marc, but a complete confession could dismantle the doctor, the lawyer, the false medical case, and the syndicate link in a single night. At the dining room threshold, Marcus glanced at me. His expression remained vacant for the cameras Marc believed did not exist yet. I saw the grief behind it. Our son had once sat at that table doing algebra homework, while Marcus drew diagrams on napkins. I had served him birthday cake in that room. Now the same table held documents designed to steal our identities. The past did not excuse the present, but it made the betrayal heavier. I lowered myself into the chair and let Marc believe the weight had finally broken me. Chloe immediately dropped her weeping daughter-in-law facade. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She lunged toward me, her manicured hands snatching the leather strap of my purse. She ripped the bag violently from my shoulder, tossing it onto a nearby entryway table. She unzipped the compartments, frantically digging through the contents, searching for the physical stock certificates and property deeds they so desperately needed to satisfy the cartel. "You old fool," Chloe hissed, her voice stripped of any remaining civility. "Where are the papers? Where did you hide the bearer bonds?" I did not answer her. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, allowing a small, confused whimper to escape my lips. I needed them to believe I was broken until the very last possible second. "Leave the bag." Marc snapped at his wife, his voice cold and commanding. "It does not matter if she hid the physical papers. The court documents render the physical papers obsolete. Bring them into the dining room. It is time to finish this." Marc pushed me roughly in the small of my back, forcing me to walk down the long, carpeted hallway toward the formal dining room. Marcus walked beside me, his face set in a tight, emotionless mask. He was a pillar of stone, absorbing the disrespect and the violence with calculated patience. We stepped through the arched doorway into the dining room. The space was brightly lit by a massive crystal chandelier. Sitting at the long mahogany table were two men. On the left sat Dr. Evans, my primary care physician. He wore a crisp white shirt and a perfectly knotted tie. He did not look up when we entered. He was carefully reviewing a stack of medical charts, his expression completely clinical and detached. He looked bored. He looked like a man evaluating a routine piece of inventory. On the right sat Richard Sterling, the predatory estate lawyer. He was leaning back in his chair, a smug, relaxed smile playing on his lips. His expensive suit jacket was draped over the back of his seat. Spread out across the polished wood of the dining table were dozens of thick legal documents. The papers were neatly organized, flagged with bright yellow signature tabs. They were the instruments of my complete destruction. "Have a seat," Vivian, the lawyer said, gesturing to the heavy wooden chair directly in front of the documents. His tone was smooth and slippery, the voice of a man accustomed to taking everything from people who could not defend themselves. "We have some important family business to conclude this evening." Marc stepped up behind me and forcefully pushed me down into the chair. He leaned over my shoulder, placing both of his hands flat on the table, trapping me in place. The smell of his cologne was suffocating. The room felt entirely devoid of oxygen. The trap had closed. The steel jaws were clamped tightly around my life. "The syndicate is waiting," Marc whispered directly into my ear, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and triumphant malice. "You are going to sign every single page on this table, Mother. You are going to give me the legal authority to save my own life, and you are going to do it right now." I stared down at the documents. The bold black letters at the top of the page read, "Durable power of attorney and absolute medical conservatorship." The yellow signature tabs glowed under the chandelier. The enemy had laid all their cards on the table. They believed the game was already won. They did not know that the table they were sitting at no longer belonged to them. I kept my hands resting weakly on my lap, preparing my final, devastating move. Marc reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He withdrew a sterile plastic casing and tossed it onto the center of the polished mahogany dining table. The plastic clattered loudly against the wood. He snapped the protective seal back with his thumb and extracted a thick medical syringe. Dr. Evans reached into his own leather medical bag resting on the floor. The physician pulled out a small glass vial containing a dense, clear liquid. He inserted the needle through the rubber stopper and slowly pulled the plunger back. The chamber filled with the chemical solution. Air bubbles rose to the top as Dr. Evans expertly flicked the plastic barrel with his index finger. He set the loaded weapon down right next to the highlighted signature line on the legal documents. Marc leaned over the table, bringing his face mere inches from mine. His breath smelled heavily of stale coffee and raw adrenaline. He pointed a rigid finger at the syringe. "You have exactly 2 choices tonight, Mother. You can pick up that pen and sign your name on every single yellow tab right now. You will transfer full medical and financial conservatorship over to me immediately. If you refuse, Dr. Evans will pick up that syringe. He will inject Dad with a concentrated sedative powerful enough to suppress his breathing, trigger a stroke, or leave him with permanent neurological damage. Then Dr. Evans will describe the collapse as the natural progression of an unstable elderly patient. Whether Dad survives intact will depend on how quickly anyone chooses to help him. Once the chemical takes effect, Dr. Evans will sign an emergency psychiatric commitment order. He will certify that Dad has suffered a catastrophic mental collapse and represents an immediate physical danger to the public. The private medical transport crew waiting in the kitchen will strap him to a gurney. They will drive him to the state-run memory care facility on the edge of the county. I have already paid the facility administrator a very generous sum to ensure Dad is placed in the maximum security lockdown ward. You will never be allowed past the front reception desk. You will never hear his voice again. I will make sure his room has no windows and no telephone. He will spend the rest of his natural life staring at a blank wall, completely trapped inside his own ruined mind. Marcus did not flinch. My husband stood perfectly rigid beside me, his shoulders squared against the threat. He stared directly into his son's eyes with a look of absolute chilling defiance. The structural engineer was calculating the physical distance between himself and Dr. Evans, preparing to intercept the needle if the physician made a sudden movement. Chloe paced excitedly behind Marc. Her eyes darted from the syringe to the legal documents, hungry for the financial windfall she believed was mere seconds away. She crossed her arms tightly, a vicious sneer twisting her features. The predatory estate lawyer Richard Sterling checked his expensive gold wristwatch. He drummed his manicured fingers against the mahogany table, annoyed by the delay. The syndicate deadline is closing in rapidly. Marc continued, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate growl. The people I owe money to do not accept apologies or extensions. They want the deed to this house, and they want it legally binding. I need your signature to ratify the property transfer. I am not going to let a cartel executioner hunt me down because you are feeling stubborn. Sign the papers, or I end Dad's life right here in this dining room. Dr. Evans reached out and rested his fingertips lightly on the plastic barrel of the loaded syringe. He nodded slowly, confirming his absolute willingness to execute the medical assault. The physician had traded his medical license for a portion of our stolen retirement funds. Sterling pushed the thick stack of conservatorship documents closer to my chest. He uncapped a heavy gold fountain pen and laid it precisely on top of the first page. "We are completely out of time, Mrs. Whitaker," the lawyer stated with clinical detachment. "Your son has the medical transport team standing by in the next room. They are entirely loyal to my firm. No one is coming to save you. The police have already relinquished custody to us. The doors are deadbolted from the inside. Pick up the pen and execute the transfer." I slowly reached my right hand toward the gold fountain pen. I ordered my muscles to replicate the violent, uncontrolled tremors of advanced neurological decay. My fingers shook sporadically as they hovered over the polished metal. I allowed my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let a small, defeated gasp escape my lips. My hand descended, gripping the barrel of the pen with a clumsy, weakened hold. The gold nib rattled loudly against the thick paper, scratching aimlessly outside the yellow signature box. I bowed my head, projecting total submission. Marc let out a sharp bark of triumphant laughter. He crossed his arms over his chest, a sickening smirk spreading across his face. He looked at the lawyer and gave a curt, arrogant nod. Chloe squealed with delight. She immediately turned her back to the table and walked quickly toward the dining room sideboard. She grabbed a heavy green bottle of vintage champagne resting in a silver ice bucket. The loud pop of the cork echoed through the tense room. She began pouring the sparkling liquid into 4 crystal flutes, already celebrating the successful theft of our entire life's work. I stopped moving. The violent tremors in my fingers vanished instantly. My right hand became as still and solid as carved marble. I lifted my head and looked directly into my son's eyes. The frail, confused dementia patient evaporated into the cold air of the dining room. I tightened my grip on the heavy gold fountain pen. I snapped my wrist upward and hurled the metal instrument across the table with maximum velocity. The heavy pen flew through the air like a dart. It struck Richard Sterling squarely in the face, the blunt end smashing hard against his right cheekbone. The lawyer yelped in shock and pain, tumbling backward in his expensive chair. He clutched his face, scrambling away from the table. I stood up abruptly. The sudden fluid motion caused Dr. Evans to jump back, completely abandoning the loaded syringe. I reached deep into the inner pocket of my heavy wool coat. I withdrew a thick, securely bound stack of documents and slapped them onto the mahogany table, completely covering Marc's fraudulent conservatorship papers. On top were copies of the federal preservation notices, the trust company's fraud lot confirmation, and the title insurer's recorded dispute notice. A stamped federal warrant cover sheet sat beneath them. "You are already too late," I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal-clear, lethal authority. I delivered the words with the rapid-fire precision of a seasoned corporate executive terminating a hostile takeover. "You are trying to seize an estate that was locked before you began. The property still exists, but it is legally inaccessible to you. Tonight I contacted a senior agent within the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. My grandson Jamal completely bypassed your pathetic home network security. He accessed your offshore cryptocurrency logs. He intercepted your encrypted communications with the cartel broker known as Silas. We forwarded your entire digital footprint directly to a federal task force." Marc's smug expression dissolved into absolute terror. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. Chloe dropped a crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending glass and alcohol splashing across the rug. "While you were busy filing false police reports and securing a rushed medical order, I activated the emergency fraud provisions in the living trust. Marcus and I established months ago," I continued. "The independent corporate trustee has locked every bond, retirement account, and trust asset against transfer substitution or collateral assignment. Jamal is a protected contingent beneficiary, not a signer you can pressure. Your temporary guardianship papers do not override the trust, and your forged powers of attorney give you control over nothing." Dr. Evans backed slowly toward the hallway, his eyes darting frantically toward the front door. Sterling lowered his hands from his bruised face, leaning forward to read the bold federal seals on the documents I had slammed down. The lawyer's breathing hitched as he realized the magnitude of his fatal error. "And as for the house on Riverside Drive," I added, twisting the tactical knife deeper into my son's chest, "I reported your fraudulent collateral filing to the title insurer, the County Fraud Unit, and the Federal Task Force. The deed you forged to secure your bridge loan from the syndicate is completely worthless. The property title is currently locked under an active federal wire fraud investigation. If the cartel attempts to claim that house as collateral, they will walk directly into an FBI sting operation. You promised the syndicate a clean asset, Marc. Instead, you handed them a federal honeypot. Silas and his associates are going to realize you sold them a massive legal trap. They are not going to take the house. They are going to take you. Marc stumbled backward, his knees hitting the edge of a dining chair. He opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His entire criminal architecture had collapsed in a matter of seconds. He was totally exposed, stripped of his leverage, and facing collection by the syndicate he had tried to outsmart. "You thought I was just an old woman waiting to be erased," I said, staring down at him with zero maternal affection. "You forgot that I spent 30 years hunting financial predators for a living. I read the fine print, I calculate the risk, and I always destroy the liability." The heavy oak front door of the house suddenly rattled under the force of a massive synchronized impact. The sound of a steel battering ram smashing through the deadbolts echoed like a bomb blast through the foyer. The wood splintered and cracked. Heavy booted footsteps stormed into the entryway. Tactical flashlights cut through the darkness of the hall. "Federal agents, get on the ground. Show your hands." The command roared through the house, followed by the terrifying clatter of tactical gear and drawn weapons. The checkmate was absolute. The board was cleared. The heavy boots of federal agents hammered against the polished oak floors of the foyer. The sheer kinetic force of their entry sent a shockwave through the dining room. Jamal stepped into the archway behind the entry team, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder. Before the breach, he had remotely disabled the household alarm and opened the side gate so agents could reach the doors without warning Marc. Behind him stood Special Agent Davis, an imposing figure wrapped in dark Kevlar, flanked by a dozen heavily armed federal agents and state troopers. The beam of tactical flashlights swept across the mahogany table, blinding the men who had thought themselves invincible. Dr. Evans was the first to break. The physician dropped his leather medical bag spun on his heel and sprinted toward the kitchen swinging doors. He did not make it 3 steps. A state trooper vaulted over a fallen dining chair and tackled him hard onto the hardwood floor. The sickening thud of the doctor's shoulder hitting the wood echoed through the room. His pristine white shirt tangled around his neck as the trooper forced his arms behind his back, securing the steel cuffs with a sharp metallic zip. Richard Sterling, the predatory lawyer who had built a career on destroying families, displayed even less dignity. He scrambled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping wildly on the spilled champagne. He threw his hands into the air, screaming that he was merely legal counsel, that he had no knowledge of any criminal conspiracy. Agent Davis did not even break his stride. He grabbed Sterling by the lapels of his custom suit, slamming him face first against the floral wallpaper. The lawyer whimpered as the cold steel bracelets locked around his wrists. Chloe retreated into the corner of the dining room, pressing her back against the display cabinet. Her designer dress was soaked in the champagne she had dropped. The reality of the federal raid stripped away every ounce of her fabricated high society arrogance. She began to hyperventilate. Her chest heaved as she pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at her husband. "It was all him," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch. "He forced me to do it. He brought those pills into the house. He told me to put them in your supplements. I did not want any part of this. He said the cartel would kill us if we did not get your house. He made me do everything. Please, you have to believe me." 2 female agents stepped forward, grabbing Chloe by the arms and pulling her away from the wall. She thrashed against their grip, sobbing wildly, begging the agents to check her phone, promising to testify against Marc in exchange for immunity. Her performance was pathetic, devoid of any loyalty or grace. The agents ignored her weeping, securing her hands and reciting her rights in a flat, unyielding monotone. Marc stood completely paralyzed at the head of the table. The federal agents formed a tight circle around him, but they did not touch him yet. Agent Davis stepped forward, holding the fraud notices and warrant cover sheet I had placed on the table moments earlier. Davis looked at the documents, looked at the empty syringe resting near the forged papers, and then looked at my son with profound disgust. Marc slowly lowered himself to his knees. The arrogant, untouchable executive vanished. The violent predator who had threatened to lock his own father in a psychiatric ward ceased to exist. He was simply a terrified, broken man, staring at the absolute destruction of his life. He looked up at me. Tears streamed down his face, cutting tracks through the nervous sweat on his cheeks. His hands trembled as he reached out, clasping the hem of my heavy wool coat. "Mom, please," Marc sobbed, his voice reduced to a hoarse, desperate whisper. "They are going to put me in federal prison. The syndicate will find me in there. Silas knows people on the inside. They are going to kill me. You have to tell the agents this was a misunderstanding. You have to tell them we were just trying to help you. I am your son. Please, Mom, you cannot let them take me away. You are the only one who can fix this." I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. I felt Marcus step up close beside me, his hand resting a firm, supportive weight on my shoulder. I looked at the tears streaming from my son's eyes. I searched my heart for any lingering trace of maternal instinct. I searched for pity. I searched for sorrow. I found absolutely nothing. The reservoir was entirely dry. "You ceased to be my son the moment you decided my life was a currency you could spend to save your own," I stated. My voice was completely calm. The volume was low, but the words carried a devastating, absolute finality. "You brought poison into my home. You forged our names. You conspired to lock the man who raised you in a medical prison so you could steal the legacy he built with his bare hands. You did not ask for our help. You demanded our destruction. Mom, I was desperate." Marc pleaded, his fingers tightening on my coat. "I made a mistake. A mistake is an error in judgment," I corrected him, stepping backward so his hands fell away from my clothing and hit the floor. This was a sustained, calculated campaign of psychological and financial terrorism. You made your choices, Marc. You chose the lifestyle. You chose the debt. You chose the cartel. Now you will choose to accept the consequences. I am not your savior. I am simply the auditor who finalized your account. You are completely bankrupt." I nodded to Agent Davis. The federal agent stepped forward, grabbed Marc by the back of his collar and hauled him roughly to his feet. Marc let out a hollow, defeated wail as his arms were wrenched behind his back. The steel handcuffs clicked shut. He went limp, his legs refusing to support his weight. 2 troopers had to drag him backward by his armpits. His expensive Italian shoes dragged across the hardwood floor, tracking through the spilled champagne and the scattered fraudulent legal papers. I stood beside my husband and my grandson, watching in complete silence as the authorities cleared the room. They hauled the corrupt doctor, the predatory lawyer, the hysterical wife, and the treacherous son out through the shattered front door, marching them directly into the cold rain and the flashing red and blue lights of the waiting transport vehicles. The house fell quiet, leaving only the 3 of us standing victorious in the ruins of the battlefield. After the last patrol vehicle left the dining room, no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a crime scene, which was exactly what it had become. Agents photographed the syringe, the forged documents, the broken champagne glass, and the restraint forms stacked beside Dr. Evans's medical bag. The transport crew members were separated and interviewed. 2 of them immediately admitted that Sterling's firm had told them we were violent dementia patients under a valid court order. Their shock appeared genuine. Davis allowed them to leave only after collecting their statements and company records. A paramedic examined Marcus and me at the table. My blood pressure was dangerously high, but my speech memory coordination and orientation were normal. Marcus had bruising along his ribs where Marc had gripped him. We refused transport to Dr. Evans's hospital and agreed to be evaluated at a federal medical facility instead. For the first time that night, a professional asked our permission before touching us. Jamal stood near the shattered front door, staring at the rain. He had helped expose his own father, and victory did not erase that fact. I joined him and placed my coat around his shoulders. He asked whether Marc would ever forgive him. I told him forgiveness was the wrong question. Marc first had to tell the truth, accept responsibility, and become someone capable of understanding what he had done. Whether that ever happened was Marc's work, not Jamal's burden. Marcus found the anniversary card inside his coat, damp but intact. He handed it to me without speaking. We had survived the dinner Marc planned for us, but our anniversary itself had passed somewhere between motel walls, police lights, and federal warrants. I looked at the broken doorway and began to laugh. The sound surprised everyone, including me. It was not joy or cruelty. It was the release of a body that had spent an entire night waiting for disaster. Marcus laughed too. Then Jamal joined us. We stood in the ruined foyer, exhausted and soaked, laughing at the absurdity of being alive. Agent Davis waited until the sound faded before approaching. He told us the account freezes would be challenged that morning, the trust remained protected, and a federal hold had been placed on the fraudulent lien. He also warned that the investigation was only beginning. The syndicate would not disappear because Marc had been arrested. Sterling's files, Marc's devices, and the live communications with Silas could lead to people far more dangerous than anyone in the dining room. I told him to follow the evidence wherever it led. Before we left, I walked back to the dining table and picked up the gold fountain pen. A dark scratch marked the wood where the nib had dragged across the unsigned page. I placed the pen inside an evidence bag held open by an agent. Marc had intended it to transfer my life into his hands. Instead, it became proof that I had refused. The afternoon sun felt incredibly warm against the wooden planks of our back porch. A gentle breeze carried the rich, smoky scent of roasting hickory wood and sweet barbecue sauce across the lawn. I sat in my favorite wicker rocking chair, holding a tall glass of iced tea. The condensation beaded against the cool glass, dampening my fingers. Marcus sat in the matching chair beside me. He was reading a thick architectural biography, occasionally looking up to watch the hummingbirds dart through the vibrant purple blossoms of our newly planted garden. A full year had passed since the night the federal agents dragged my son out of his home. The passage of time had smoothed the jagged edges of that memory, leaving behind a profound, enduring peace. The air in our lives felt clean stripped of the toxic anxiety that had secretly suffocated us for years. We had reclaimed our home. We had restored the damaged safety deposit boxes. We had reinforced our boundaries. Down on the grass, Jamal expertly flipped a row of thick steaks on the cast-iron grill. He had completed another strong year at Howard and earned a competitive summer internship with the security division of a major financial institution. He was still learning, still building, and no longer financially dependent on his father's approval. The amended trust named him as a contingent beneficiary under the oversight of an independent corporate trustee, ensuring that our legacy would one day pass with safeguards, responsibility, and clear boundaries. The judicial system moved with unusual speed because the evidence came from many independent sources: the trust company, the title insurer, Marc's employer, the seized devices, the recorded dining room threats, and the toxicology report. Marc was convicted of wire fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, conspiracy, coercion, and attempted elder abuse. He received a lengthy federal sentence. The syndicate he feared was later dismantled through a broader racketeering case built from the lawfully seized ledgers and communications connected to Silas. Chloe attempted to negotiate a plea agreement by testifying against her husband, but her direct role in administering the drugs and fabricating witness statements destroyed any chance of immunity. She received a substantial prison sentence and emerged from the case bankrupt, stripped of the country club memberships, vehicles, and social status she had valued above human life. Dr. Evans and Richard Sterling both lost their professional licenses permanently and received prison terms for conspiracy, fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. The transport company was not charged after investigators confirmed that its employees had been shown falsified orders, but it changed its verification procedures statewide. The legal aftermath was not as simple as the arrest. For several months, our lives were filled with interviews, sworn statements, medical examinations, title hearings, and meetings with prosecutors. The temporary guardianship order was vacated within hours after an independent physician examined us. Judge Harrison was removed from elder cases while investigators reviewed his conduct. The evidence ultimately showed that Sterling had exaggerated his influence. The judge had accepted a rushed affidavit and failed to provide basic safeguards, but investigators did not prove that he had taken a bribe. He resigned before the disciplinary hearing and was later barred from returning to the bench. I was satisfied with the truth, even though it was less dramatic than the rumor. The toxicology report was devastating. The capsules contained a sedative and muscle relaxant in doses calculated to create fatigue, tremors, slowed speech, and short-term memory disruption. The laboratory also found traces of the same compounds in a bottle recovered from Chloe's kitchen. Dr. Evans's prescription records linked him to the supply. Faced with those results and the recorded threat involving the syringe, his defense collapsed. His medical license was revoked before the criminal trial began. Marc's employer recovered part of the stolen money through frozen cryptocurrency accounts and insurance claims. The company did not recover everything, but its executives publicly acknowledged that weak internal controls had allowed the scheme to grow. Jamal's evidence helped them rebuild those controls. Davis made certain Jamal was treated as a witness, not a vigilante. The lawful records from the employer trust company, title insurer, cloud providers, and seized devices carried the case. That distinction mattered to my grandson. He learned that skill without restraint could become another form of arrogance, the same disease that had destroyed his father. Our Riverside Drive title was cleared after a civil hearing. The court declared the lien fraudulent, canceled the forged collateral assignment, and ordered the notary's bond to cover part of the legal cost. Victor Vance, the notary who had authenticated signatures he never witnessed, pleaded guilty to fraud and lost his commission. The house itself needed repairs after Marc and Chloe tore through it. Marcus rebuilt the damaged office with his own hands. He replaced the broken shelving, reinforced the safe, and restored my desk, using wood from an old oak tree that had fallen behind the property years earlier. He said a repaired structure should show where it had been strengthened. I left one faint scar in the desktop untouched. Healing did not arrive as a single victorious moment. Some mornings I woke with my heart racing because I thought I heard Marc's voice in the hallway. Marcus began checking the locks twice before bed. For months, neither of us accepted food or medicine without examining the seal. We attended counseling with a specialist in elder abuse, not because we doubted our sanity, but because betrayal alters the nervous system long after the danger ends. We learned to separate caution from fear and memory from obligation. Jamal carried his own burden. He loved his father even after choosing to expose him. During the first prison visit, Marc demanded that Jamal apologize for ruining the family. Jamal stood, ended the visit, and did not return for 6 months. When he finally went back, he brought no money and made no promises. He told Marc that accountability was the only relationship still available between them. I had never been prouder of him. The trust was amended after careful legal review. Jamal became a contingent beneficiary, not the controller of our lives. An independent corporate trustee remained in place, and Marcus and I retained full use of everything we had earned. We gave Jamal support for school, but we did not turn gratitude into another form of dependency. Protecting him meant giving him opportunity and boundaries, not a fortune without structure. On our next anniversary, Marcus and I did not host a large celebration. We drove to the small lakeside restaurant where he had proposed 41 years earlier. The building had changed owners 3 times, and the old wooden dock leaned slightly toward the water, but the view was the same. Marcus raised his glass and asked what I wanted for the years ahead. I told him I wanted ordinary mornings, coffee in our kitchen, books on the porch, arguments about where to plant tomatoes, a life so peaceful that no one would mistake it for weakness. He smiled and said, ordinary life was the most valuable structure we had ever built. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my iced tea and looked out across the peaceful expanse of our property. The grass was green, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. We had survived the ultimate betrayal. Sometimes the most dangerous threats do not come from strangers hiding in the dark. Sometimes the predators share your last name. They sit at your dining table, eat the food you cooked, and smile while calculating the exact value of your life. Society tells us that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred bloodline that demands infinite forgiveness and endless sacrifice. But blood does not excuse malicious intent. When the people you raised decide that your existence is nothing more than an obstacle to their greed, you have to find the courage to cut them out. You have to find the strength to stop being a mother and start being a survivor. True family is not defined by biology. True family is defined by loyalty, by protection, and by respect. I lost a son, but I saved my husband, I secured my grandson, and I reclaimed my absolute freedom. And I have never slept better.